Hello FlossTube and welcome back to the next episode of the Celebration of Colour Stitch Along. I am trying to improve the dreadful winter lighting that I've been getting in the recent videos. So I have got a ring light on, and if I, get my glasses in the wrong place, it obviously makes me look like a crazy scientist. I hope that when I'm mostly looking at the camera, it is mostly not too bad. If it's really distracting, I won't film it again, but I might do it differently next time. Anyway, so we have stitched so far red, purple, red and red orange, and you should have something. Let me find something to put it behind it. No, I haven't got anything handy. That's really helpful. Let's just try a piece of linen behind it at least. There we go, that's not too bad. You should have something that looks a bit like this. So we are a quarter of the way through the stitch along. We are more than a quarter of the way through the stitching, therefore, because the early parts are bigger. I keep telling you this so that you're not going to give up. And obviously, if you've not quite kept up with all the yellow or all the black, that is really fine. The reason why it's bigger at the beginning is to try and make it easier by giving you more of the frame to start with, so that you've got, it's just easier, I think, to count stitches than holes, isn't it? And I will tell you how I know that. I have had to re-stitch at the end of this section this little bit in this bottom right square here, because when I filled in the frame around it, I discovered it was not in the centre. So I've had to redo that this time. Once again, apologies, there were mistakes in the chart. I'm really trying. What I had been hoping to try and do this week was catch up, so that not only would I have stitched the red orange, but also the orange before I put the chart out, so that I could be more confident that I'd captured mistakes. I have stitched the whole thing, but I stitched it sort of as the whole thing, and then went back and made some changes about where I thought we were going to split up for the different parts and so on. And it's been the generating of the individual charts with the grayed out areas of what we've already stitched that has been quite complicated. And I wanted to do it like that because I thought it would make it easier, but I'm not sure it is because of the mistakes. Thank you if you are persevering despite the mistakes, and huge thank you if you're one of the people who gets in touch with me and says, I think there's a mistake here, Roz. And I will try and correct things as soon as I can. And so that is one of the things I want to say is, if you are stitching this and you come across something you think is a mistake, so particularly, there's a grayed out area and you think, well, we haven't stitched that yet, Roz, do check. Do go back and download the chart again, because when I make the corrections, I upload it and add it to the Linktree, and usually I'll put a little thing on the download link, but also on the chart itself to say, corrected on this date, or corrected for the second time on this date, or whatever. So you should be able to tell if you've got the most recent version of the chart and check that. But obviously do feel free, leave me a comment on YouTube. The quickest way is probably to send me a DM on Instagram, but if you're not on Instagram, I will come and check the YouTube comments as well, and I'm trying to respond as quickly as I can to make sure your stitching is not as frustrating as it could be. It's still quite frustrating, I know, and I'm really sorry about that. But anyway, I wonder how you're finding the stitch so far. If you've finished all three parts, how do you feel about this combination of colours? Orange, a sort of reddish orange, a red and a red purple. When I was a teenager in the 1980s, they were colours that we were always told would clash and you shouldn't wear them together. I never quite knew what people meant by that, that word clash. And I have always loved those kind of colours together. You see them in gardens and people call it a hot border. Those really bright, beautiful reds and oranges and pinks. And I just think they look fabulous together. I think they add to rather than mute down each other. There isn't any sort of calming. There is that sort of making each other really zing about it. And I really love this section of the colour wheel. Anyway, I think that is all I have to say about the chart. There isn't going to be any more red orange, so if you finish all the red orange in this chart, you can put that colour away. We are done with it. and we are now on to orange. Orange. So what I wanted to talk about, let me just show you first of all, because this is my second chart. I will put a picture somewhere, put a picture somewhere of what this looked like on my first run through, and the colour palette I'm using there. The colour palette I'm using for the second one is a bit different. It's a bit more muted, it's a bit less sort of off centre, and the colour I'm using for orange is this. It's Classic Colourworks Colonial Copper. So far I've been using various colours of Anchor thread, which I haven't got the numbers to hand, but I could find if you really wanted them. But for this one I'm using Colonial Copper. And the yellow that I've been using is quite a sort of greenish yellow. I really love it. But as I was choosing colours around it, I needed to make sure that we sort of ended up with this as yellow rather than yellow green. So this is the orange I'm using, and then we've got an orange yellow, which is more yellowish than not, and then this, which will count as my yellow, and then you'll see what I've done for yellow, green, and going the way. So when you're doing this kind of colour wheel, you don't have to have it sort of set in the kind of middle of each colour. You can have it so it's all slightly off to one side, and that gives you a really interesting thing. It's like the difference between using red, yellow and blue as your primary colours, or yellow, magenta and cyan. There's a reason why people do it, which is to do with the difference between light and paint. But actually, even in painting, if you use that, you get a really interesting effect that just looks a bit more sophisticated, thoughtful, whatever, than the sort of classic primaries. So anyway, that's what I'm using for orange. And what I want to talk about this week is how colours gain symbolism. So many people, most of us, I guess, orange is when we tend to think of orange, we tend to think of a very bright orange usually, although obviously it can come in much darker shades and much paler shades. It can come in slightly brownish tones, slightly more reddish, slightly more yellowish. But I think when we think of orange, we tend to think of the colour of an orange. And for most of us, that's a ripe orange with a really bright orange colour. There is a question, did the fruit come first or the colour? The fruit was developed in, I think, China, certainly somewhere in the Far East, and its original name was something like narang. And as the fruit spread and the name of the fruit spread, it became a naranja and an orange, an orange, and then an orange. I don't know, but I wonder if it was a little bit like what happened with adders. So I don't know if you know this, the snake, the adder, used to be called Nada with an N at the beginning. But because Nada sounds quite similar to an adder, the Nada became known as the adder. And I don't know whether that's quite what happened with the orange. You can imagine it, can't you? An orange becoming an orange. Anyway, it's the fruit that comes first. And before the introduction of the fruit, and in fact, sometime after the introduction of the fruit, there was no real word in English for orange. It was known as yellow-red. I mean, it makes sense. It's a kind of yellowish red. And so it's not until quite late, I think it's the 15th century, there's a reference to someone ordering orange sleeves for a dress. So at that point, she's not saying sleeves the colour of the fruit orange. She's just using it to mean the colour of the sleeves will be orange coloured. So it takes a while, but it is from the fruit that we get the word for orange to mean the colour orange. And it's as the fruit orange spreads, for us, like I say, it's a sort of bright, happy colour, summery kind of colour because of the fruit. It tends to be a summery kind of fruit. In England, you can only really grow oranges if you've got an orangery or a conservatory to make it artificially warm and protected through the winter and get, lots and lots of sunlight in the summer. So it has that sort of bright, happy tone to it. That is not the symbolism it has everywhere. So if you live in the Netherlands, orange is the colour of the royal house of the Netherlands. So I can't remember, I did look this up, but I now can't remember exactly when that began. But I think there's a sort of cross-pollination. There's a place in France, there's a town which has a name that sort of sounds a bit like orange. It's spelled differently. It's not from the fruit. I think if you pronounce French really well, it sounds a little bit different, but it's quite similar. And there's a principality around that place that's known as the Principality of Orange, is how it comes to be known. And the prince from there becomes a prince in part of the Netherlands. I think it's at the time when the Netherlands is lots and lots of different countries. And anyway, at some point, the king of the Netherlands becomes known, the prince of the Netherlands becomes known as the Prince of Orange, and the ruling house of the Netherlands is the House of Orange. And because at this point, orange has come to mean the colour and not just the fruit, orange becomes the colour of the Netherlands. And they spend quite a long time trying to put it in their flag, and they fail because at that point they don't have a light, fast orange dye. And so they dye their flag in, I think, in the stripes, blue and white and orange, but the orange always fades back to red. And so the flag doesn't actually have orange in it. But, Dutch sports teams, including their football teams, still play in orange colours. There's a day that they have in the spring called Queen Day, and everything is orange for Queen Day. I used to be part of an international sock knitting competition. Yes, that's as crazy as it sounds, but often the Dutch knitters would be knitting orange socks for Orange Day, for Queen Day. Orange is their colour, and for them it's a symbol of national pride. That's how they recognise their national identity, is through that colour. And that's true of many places, isn't it? Often it's more than one colour, it's the colour of the flag. So here it would be red, white and blue, as it would in the US. But lots of countries, that's, again, sports teams play in their national colours. When people are designing charts or doing fundraisers for things in Ukraine, they're using the colours of blue and yellow because that's what symbolises Ukraine. It's in the flag, but it's also the nation itself. So colour often goes with national identity. But orange has an interesting history that goes beyond just the royal house of the Netherlands. So in the 17th century, there's a complicated situation in the English royal household. It is English. At that time, it's English and Scottish rather than, we haven't yet had the Act of Union that makes that one thing. So it's one person but holding two positions. But it's really England that is the focus of the problem. We've had, at the early 17th century, Charles I had his head cut off, first half. Then we have that period where there is no monarchy in England. There's a Commonwealth. Then we have the Restoration with Charles I's son, Charles II. And Charles II has no legitimate heirs. He has plenty of illegitimate children, but he has no legitimate heirs. And so his heir is his younger brother, James II. Now, because of all the problems that have happened in the 17th century, 16th and 17th century, it is now the case that you cannot be a Catholic and a member of the English royal family. So James II denies that he is a Catholic and essentially is Catholic in all but name at this point. That's clearly where his religious sympathies lie, but he wants to be king, he is king, and so he denies it. Over in the Netherlands, I don't know what it's called at that point. I want to say Holland, but I don't think it even is Holland. I think it's some other part of the Netherlands. Anyway, there is William, Prince of Orange. He's not the first Prince of Orange. He's 4 or 5 generations in, maybe, that they've started calling Orange. He has been a fighter around Europe, involved in various things, always on the Protestant side. He is married to James II's eldest daughter, Mary. She is also very staunchly Protestant, and the two of them together are a sort of Protestant powerhouse in Europe. And so a number of people in England, a number of powerful people in England, very concerned about James II, who's basically Catholic, who also doesn't have any sons. And they think it would be much better if William and Mary came to take over. in England. And so that they send this letter of invitation. William and Mary decide that they must come. It's always a little bit tense because she is the one who really has the right. He's a cousin. He has, some connections with the English royal household. But if it had been just her, they wouldn't have invited her. It's her and her husband. So they're always listed together, William and Mary. There's a sort of, they rule together very, very carefully together. And they arrive in England, and there's what they call the Glorious Revolution. James II runs away effectively. And so they take the throne without any bloodshed. But James II is still around, obviously, and a little bit aggrieved at this. And so what you then get throughout the 18th century are the various uprisings, Stuart uprisings. And at the same time as all of this has been going on in England, there have been sort of one stage of the ongoing conflict in Ireland has been happening. So I will not pretend to be anything like an expert on Irish history. The one thing I would say is, however far you think you have to go back to try and understand it, you always have to go back further. The 17th century is not the beginning of the problems in Ireland caused by the English, but it is a point at which they flare up, shall we say. Anyway, after the Glorious Revolution, there comes a point where there is a battle in Ireland between James II and his sort of Irish and Scottish followers that he's brought together, and William III and his English army. And William wins. It's the Battle of the Boyne, and William wins. And so English supremacy is re-established in Ireland for a period of time. And William III is this sort of great hero of the Protestant Irish and the sort of British Irish, such that by the time you get to the Troubles in the 1970s, and a lot of things have happened in between, this is not a video about Irish history, but by the time you get to the Troubles in the 1970s, William III reappears. So one of the things that they are doing at that point is painting murals on the ends of houses and buildings in Belfast and other town cities around Europe, and some of them look like this. And that is William III, the Prince of Orange. And so some of them are in orange. And you also have, at this point, in Northern Ireland, what are called orange orders, which are sort of societies, fraternals, I think they're often called, of people who are sort of Protestant and loyal to the British. And the people who are part of the orange orders are called orange men, and they go on orange marches. And you see them like this, and they'll be wearing great orange sashes and carrying banners that are orange. And orange, at that point, is not, we are loyal to the Netherlands. Oh, no. That is a colour which has taken on its own symbolism in a different part of the world. Yes, there's a link. It's through William III, who was William of Orange, but it is an entirely different thing at this point. This is not saying we want to be part of the Netherlands, or, we want to be ruled by a king from the Netherlands. It's saying, like William III, we are British, and we want to be British. And there's some religious overtones around it, but it's primarily a political statement. And wearing orange in Northern Ireland 30, 40 years ago, maybe even still today, I don't know, was not a sign of sort of happy summer, sunshine, fun, fruit. It was a very clear political statement. Thankfully, we are not living in the period of the Troubles anymore. For me, over here in England, it was a thing that was always on the news, and occasionally was a thing that felt quite real. There would be bombs, there would be bomb threats, you'd be evacuated from train stations, that sort of thing. People did die in England as part of the Troubles, but it was nothing like the experience of people who were living in Northern Ireland themselves at the time. And it is always concerning when there is a little bit of a resurgence of violence in Northern Ireland, but it is a great thing that it is no longer commonplace in the day that it once was, in the way that it once was. There are still political troubles in Northern Ireland right now. There's some issues around whether the sort of power sharing devolved government can function. Brexit has not been a good thing for making that easy to work in Northern Ireland. But I think these days it's probably safe to wear an orange t-shirt. And that hasn't always been the case. So colour can have really powerful symbolism. It's not always the same in all places. Orange is a good example of that. There are other examples of that. So, you know, it's always quite striking, is it, when you see pictures from China and often other places in the Far East as well, where people will wear red wedding dresses. And you think, gosh, I mean, it's not that you couldn't wear a red wedding dress in this country, but it would be quite a statement. You know, here red is mostly associated with danger or with poison, or also with sexual promiscuity, with adultery, you know, the scarlet woman, the scarlet letter. But in China, it's associated with luck and prosperity and wealth. So obviously a bigger colour to wear on your wedding day. So colour and symbolism, I think, are really fascinating. They are cultural rather than inherent, I think. Some have a basis in nature, so like red and poison is a thing that's often true in nature. Red berries and red bugs and red birds and things like that. It's often either a real signal or a false signal. Don't eat me, I will kill you. But a lot of symbolism is just built up in cultural associations rather than anything inherent to that colour. Anyway, there's some things to think about while you're stitching orange. I hope there are no mistakes this time. I'll be back next week and we will be moving on to orange yellow when we are going to be looking at another artist. Thanks so much if you're stitching along. Thanks so much for watching, whether you're stitching along or not. And I will see you next time.